Chapter 5. The Great Tunnel Disaster, as it became known, started the day after the flowers were dismissed, or weeded, as Coop put it. I'm not talking about a little hole in the ground or a small cave. I'm talking about a real, full-blown tunnel that any mining engineer would have been proud of. Coop must have been planning it for months, or even years. He had drawn up elaborate schematics and complicated mathematical equations. He had collected shovels, sledgehammers, picks, wheelbarrows, wooden posts for beams, planks for the walls and ceiling, scuba gear in case he ran out of air, all stored in the shed in back of the house, which neither of my parents ever went into. I was recruited as his assistant engineer and co-conspirator after I swore on his favorite possession, his tap shoes, that I would not tell a living soul about his plan. It was easy to keep that promise because there really wasn't a plan. Plans have endings. Coop's tunnel only had a beginning hidden behind the shed. Mom and Dad thought Coop was lazy and lacked drive. I guess they never took into account the time it took him to dig the tunnel, which authorities later determined was more than a mile long. Coop was inside that muddy tube every single night, week after week, for 8 months. When he hit an obstacle he couldn't break through, he would go around it, over it, under it, the tunnel slithering beneath the neighborhood like a giant earthworm. His nightly routine was to wake up around 11, eat a tuna fish sandwich, then walk across the backyard to the shed, where he would change into his digging clothes, my mom's yellow rain slicker and pants. It was cold in the tunnel and wet. When he finished digging for the night, he'd rinse off the mud with a garden hose, dry himself with an old towel, change into his jeans and t-shirt, and sneak back into the house. On school days, I was Coop's alarm clock. My job was to get him out of the tunnel before my parents woke up. On weekends, I joined him in the tunnel. My job was hauling buckets of dirt and dumping them into the wheelbarrow. After 4 months into the project, Coop broke through a wall of dirt and discovered a cavern. "I knew it!" he shouted. "I knew there was something down here." What he had discovered was his own tunnel from a month earlier, evidenced by the molding tuna sandwich inside the Ziploc bag lying on the tunnel floor. Somehow he had gone in a complete circle and bumped into his old lunch. Coop kept digging. The longer the tunnel became, the slower the progress. Every scoop of dirt had to be wheelbarrowed back to the entrance and dumped into the stream that ran down the gully in back of our house. He started punching head-size holes in the surface every few nights to figure out where he was, hoping to find a closer dumping site. One night, a dog bit him on the nose. Coop still kept digging. A flashlight was fine for finding his way down the dark tunnel, but for digging, he used a lantern. The fuel lasted 100 times longer than batteries, and it was cheaper. Coop found a second dump site about a quarter-mile downstream from the shed and was once again making good progress on the tunnel. He had also discovered some artifacts, a handful of musket balls and a rusty bayonet he claimed were from the Civil War. Spring break was a few weeks away, and a couple of months after that, school would be out. "We'll have the whole summer to dig," he said. "Who knows what else we'll find?" On the last night of the project, we found a gas line. It was a Saturday morning, a little after 3. The night before, Coop had bumped into the Mesa's Olympic-size swimming pool and was digging along the side of it, hoping he had chosen the shortest way around. He was grunting so loudly in the confined space while he swung the pick, he didn't hear the hissing noise. I was lying right behind him, waiting for the next bucket of dirt. "Do you hear that?" I asked. "What?" Coop said, taking another swing with the pick. "Do you smell that?" "I don't smell anything except my own sweat. The pool is heated and the wall is warm." He moved the lantern to a better position. "I can hardly wait until we get around this thing. I can't believe I bumped into it, of all the luck. At least we won't have to shore up this side of the—" Coop swore, then yelled, "Run!" The tunnel was not tall enough to run in. I crawled on my hands and knees as fast as I could, with Coop's head bumping into my rear. We were 20 yards from the second entrance when we heard the whoomph. I didn't see the fireball because Coop had straddled my back and covered my head with his body. The last thing I remember was feeling as if I was flying down a muddy rifle barrel like a musket ball with Coop hanging on to me. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Mom was sitting next to my bed reading an article in the Journal of Astrophysics called The Formation of Polar Disk Galaxies. "How's Coop?" I asked. "He's insane," Mom answered. Except for some burns and singed hair, Coop was fine. The same could not be said for our neighborhood. McLean is across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. Aside from former astronauts and Nobel laureates, we have senators, CIA agents, Georgetown University professors, lobbyists, and other people, like the vice president's daughter and her family, whose house is kitty corner to ours. 200 local, state, and federal law enforcement agents arrived within minutes of the explosion. They thought it was a terrorist attack. It didn't take them long to figure out that it was only Coop. Every inch of his tunnel had collapsed, which led them directly to the shed in our backyard. I missed everything after the fireball, but I heard about it after I came out of my coma. The blast blew us right past the second entrance. Coop and I caught on fire, or at least our pants did, but we were mostly put out by the water from the Mesa's swimming pool. Mostly. Through all of it, Coop hung on to me. He dug us out of the collapsed tunnel with his bare, blistered hands, stopping every few seconds to blow air into my lungs. He carried me across our back lawn to my waiting parents and several federal agents, looking like the creature from the Black Lagoon. Our pants were still smoking. Dad took me. The Federal Bureau of Investigation took Coop. They hustled him into the back of a black sedan and drove him away before anyone in the neighborhood saw him. The whole thing was hushed up. The headline the next morning read, "Gas Line Explosion Scares McLean." I think our family was the only one who knew what really happened. By the time I got out of the hospital a couple of days after I regained consciousness, you wouldn't have known anything bad had happened in the neighborhood. The lawns had been repaired, the flowers replanted, and the 5 trees that were knocked down were cut up and hauled away. The only thing still being worked on was the Mesa's pool. They ended up having to replace it. 2 FBI agents came by the house, and Agent Ryan did all the talking. She told us that in the interest of national security, they were going to stick with the gas line explosion story. She said that people were already jumpy enough with all the terrorist threats. It wouldn't do anyone any good to know that a 14-year-old dug a mile-long tunnel and blew up a swath of one of the most secure neighborhoods in America. I'm probably violating some state secret act by writing about it here. They let Coop go a few days after I got home. His hands were wrapped in bandages. He said they kept him in a nice room with a comfortable bed and brought him a tuna fish sandwich whenever he asked for one. Several times a day, different people came into the room asking the same questions over and over again, but mostly he talked with Agent Ryan, whom he got along with well. There wasn't much my parents could do to punish him. They couldn't ground someone who doesn't care if he can't leave the house. They couldn't take away the phone, computer, or TV from someone who doesn't use any of them. They could have taken away his tap shoes, but they knew he would just tap in regular shoes, or his bare feet. Muted tapping. No more tunnel digging, Dad said. Coop agreed. Later, up in his bedroom, I asked him about his hands. No big deal. I got some blisters when I put out your pants. They got infected when I dug us out. He hesitated, and tears came to his eyes. The worst part of it was thinking that I'd killed you, Meatloaf. Coop would have gotten out of the tunnel a lot faster without having to drag me through the suffocating muck. Coop hung on to me with blistered hands. Coop filled my lungs with air from his lungs. Coop could have died trying to save me. More than the tunnel had collapsed that terrible night. After that, things weren't the same between Coop and me. We were brothers. We were friends. But he no longer confided in me. It was as if we were in separate passageways. When Coop talked to me, there was an echo now. I couldn't tell where he was. When I complained about it, he said, "I've got to travel my path, and you have to travel yours."